Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another Bird Brains podcast.
What's
I'm
going on,
Jay,
guys? I'm Chris.
and
And
we
we are the
are
Bird
Bird
Brains
Brains.
podcast. Oh man, we got to work on that. That was
We need to get on the phone one day and just like do that for an hour.
she said my 10-year-old could do better than that, so she's gonna make fun of me.
That's okay. That's what dads are for. It's to embarrass kids.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
true. Gotta love it.
So, what are we talking about today?
Well, I think we've had quite a few comments in our last podcast videos, and one of the big ones was Gouldian Finches, breeding them, what they like to eat, weather, temperatures, things like that, their temperaments. So I think we're gonna hit on them for this video and hopefully give some good information on the Gouldian finches and where they come from, just a little bit about them and the goods and the bads that come with this beautiful finch that is become a world favorite, especially with bird
Yeah,
breeders. So
I think I mean we talked about it. Gouldians are what drew both of us to the hobby. I
yeah,
think they draw in a lot of people, and it makes sense. I mean, they're beautiful birds. They have a lot to offer. They have great personalities. They do a big mating display. There's some serious upsides to Gouldians. Downsides too. Um, they're
yeah,
pricey.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah, so I always tell people, and we've talked about this a million times, like shouldn't be your first finch. Just don't,
right,
all the people out there watching this thinking, oh, I'm going to get a Gouldian. Just wait, learn first. It'll be better for you and the birds. Um, as far as basic care, it's really not that different from your zebras, your societies, your other finches, with a few exceptions.
yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, you feel that way too.
Yeah, for sure. And as far as like the housing goes and the foods that they eat, really not much difference. And in our
Mhm.
last podcast, we talked about trying to provide as much space as you can, trying to provide a little bit of a variety of the diet, right? Seeds with fresh veggies and things like that. Gullion finches really fall in that same bucket. Um, as far as the temperament goes or temperatures, the Gouldian finches have a little bit of a harder time adapting to cooler weather. Um, they can. I live in Utah. We have incredibly cold winters, snow on the ground 6 months of the
Mhm.
year. And I've had some pretty cold nights and cold temperatures in my shed in the past, and you can acclimatize them and they can make it work, but they don't like it. Whereas
Yeah, and
some of the other finches, they just tolerate it better. The Gouldian finches, they you can make it work and make it happen for them. But like I said, they don't really love it. They don't like it. It
yeah,
doesn't
and
taste
it's a
good.
slow process. I mean, so they're
Right.
from northwest Australia in the wild, right? The Kimberley region of Australia, which is you would think, me being a North America guy, you being a North America guy, you hear north and you're like, oh, that's colder. It's the reverse in Australia, right? So the further north you go, the closer to the equator you are. So
Yeah.
they come from like I guess it's still probably considered like a subtropical region, but it's definitely like it's warmer than Florida. It's probably roughly like southern Mexico for North
Yeah.
American people on the climate scale there. And then Gouldian finches don't have down feathers. They don't need them where they live. So down, if you look at a bird, you got the top feather that you see, and then underneath you have that white, kind of fluffier feather.
Really, really soft feathers. Yeah.
It's what they use for like goose down in like down jackets or pillows. Is a bigger version of that kind of feather. So Gouldians don't have that, um, which makes it harder for them to tolerate that. And if you took a Gouldian that
Yeah.
wasn't acclimatized and you go
Oh,
below
yeah.
60 degrees, you're not going to have a Gouldian.
Yeah, and I have
Um,
to, many times in Utah, we have one like great example. Today, 55 degrees, we're coming out of winter, so 55 degrees right now. We're in short sleeve shirts, shorts. It feels really nice, warm. The birds love it. We're letting them go outside in the aviary, and tomorrow it's expected to snow by the evening time, So it's just like kind of crazy. So you have to be careful of that, especially if you have outdoor aviaries where your birds can go in and out. You get those quick temperature changes, and that's really difficult for them. And so you got to monitor that and kind of baby it a little bit. An example, I've got my aviary, it's connected to my shed. So the birds have the option to be in a nice warm climate inside the shed. It's heat, temperature controlled, right? They can go out to aviary. I've got like my rosy borks. They're incredibly hardy birds. Your zebra finches are as
Mhm.
well. They'll sit outside in the snow. I mean, it's snowing on them, and they're happy as can be. They're eating the snow. They're playing. They're flying around. If the Gouldian finches have an option or to go in or out, they will stay in the warm shed 10 out of 10 times. I usually don't see
Right.
them out in the aviary until it's warm, or they'll fly out there, they'll see that it's cold, and they fly
Say
right
nope.
back in.
Yeah.
Yep, they're pretty smart when it comes to that, and they're like, I don't like the temperature, so it's kind of interesting to see how that works. But yeah, agreed. Just gotta
Yeah.
kind of gotta treat them a little bit differently. So
And those night times, I think sometimes birds will make like I think of it as like making a mistake. So like here in Alabama right now, springtime too. So during the day today it was almost 80, gonna get down to 50 tonight. So 50 by itself might not kill a Gouldian, but a 30-degree drop in a few
right,
hours, that's a different story.
yep,
So you have a bird that thinks, oh, it's not cold. I'm gonna fall asleep out here, and then they're toast in the night. So
yep, for
yeah,
sure.
you got to baby them a little bit. Um, as far as other things for their care, so to keep them, they don't need this. To breed them, you need bird charcoal. There's a couple Australian species. Mass grass finches are another one that like it. Almost all my finches will actually go and pick at it, but the
Yeah,
Australians, to breed them, you're going to need bird charcoal. And so, if we're going to talk about breeding a little bit, let's talk about condition of Gouldian uh, lines in captivity. So, we've talked about it before. The numbers are coming up now. They're actually much bigger than this now. But in my lifetime, so I was born in the 90s, early 90s, the Gouldians got down to like, they were trapped in the pet trade through like the 70s, thousands of birds a year. And they got down to like 2,500 birds in the wild. I think they're up to like 10,000 now, which is awesome.
that's
But
cool.
in captivity, there are millions of Gouldians. Like I've personally got at least one Gouldian that's from the Netherlands. It was captive bred there.
That's
They're
awesome.
all over. Yeah, it is cool. And I mean, I've seen guys in Japan. I follow a guy on Instagram in Japan that's got Gouldians. So they're everywhere.
Yeah,
However, like we've also talked about in our previous episodes, go check them out if you haven't listened. The quality of Gouldians varies wildly in a bunch of different
yeah,
ways. You have overall health, genetic health, so like how inbred are they? You have size, huge. I've seen Gouldians that are this big and Gouldians that are this big. I mean,
right.
big size variation. And then also, um, with the different colors and things, like I know everybody always wants a blueback Gouldian. Well, to make blueback Gouldians, they inbred birds, so they're not nearly as hardy as a greenback Gouldian.
Right.
You want to talk about that too?
Yeah, and I've probably the last 10 years, 8 of those 10 years, I've heavily bred the Gouldian finch and have tried to selective breed certain colors, certain body types and size. And yeah, I agree with you 100%, Jay. I mean, there's do's and don'ts to the trade, right? But the cool thing with the Gouldian finches is you can get so many colors. And, I mean, in my collection that I have right now, and I have had bluebacks in the past, but I don't currently have any at this moment. But I have everything else. You've got the greenbacks, the
Same.
yellowbacks, all three head colors, purple breast, white breast. I mean, so there's a lot of combinations that you can do with the Gouldian finches, which are awesome. But still, with that, it is important to when you're trying to breed for certain colors that you try to match up same headlight colors, for example, that tends to give you a better colored chick. My I don't have any small size Goulians right now because I've purposely tried to breed out of that and selectively bring in. So most of my Goulian finches have pretty good body size to them, and they're not fat. They just have they're a bigger body
It's
type,
just
which
a big bone bird. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I have brought some breeding lines in that have come from European countries, and they've done a pretty good job with most Australian species and breeding kind of that bigger genetics. So things like that are awesome. And I'd probably say I get asked questions all the time. if I put this color and this color together, what colors do I get? And like I said, you really could produce the rainbow with certain color types. But I would say, as a general rule of thumb, your redheads are dominant, your blackheads are recessive, and then your orange heads are recessive. So redhead comes first, then second is your blackhead, then third is your yellow head or orange head. Some people call them both colors. So if you're putting a redhead with a blackhead, your chicks are going to come out all redhead colors, and then some of them, usually your females, are split to blackhead, things like that. So your greenbacks, those are dominant colors, right? So if you put a greenback with any other colored bird, you're going to get greenbacks. Now, yellow, if you have a dominant yellow, that's where it can be confusing, because those will produce sex-linked colors. So you can get like yellow-backed females or dilute males. But general rule of thumb, your greenbacks will trump most colors, with the exception of yellow. So things like that. So they've got some pretty good Lady Gouldian Finch genetic calculators out on the internet that are actually really cool, and I've used them a ton in the past. They've been very helpful. So if you know if your birds are split to like white breast, or split to a different color head, or colored black, like a blue back or things like that, and you can plug all those genetics in, and it'll give you the calculations of what to expect with those upcoming chicks. So it's really fun, really cool. But I would say, don't just pair anything up together. Try to keep your body size as good as you can. You want your colors to be as pure as you can. Sometimes you get blotches of black or purple colorations into the white breast, and we want to try and keep it as pure as we can and as best as we can. So selective breeding is pretty important, and you want to make sure that you try to pair up your best colors, your best body size birds with each other, and not just pairing up any Gouldian finch with the other, because sometimes that really comes back to bite you in the butt afterwards. You have poor genetics, poor health, things like that arise in the future, and it's not as great as you'd like.
Yeah, and it's not always easy to do, right? So if you
Right.
get Gouldians that you don't know their history, you
Yeah.
might find out you have a split. Ask me how I know. But oh, and I think that I know that's happened to you before too.
Yep.
And you end up posting a picture to your followers, or I do, whoever is that. Hey, does this one look? Everyone else seeing blue here, or like, oh,
Yeah.
yellow birds, right? Who's your dad?
Yeah.
So we need to get my friend Alex, who's SoCal Gouldians on Instagram. We need to get him on here
Yeah.
soon.
Absolutely.
And he's already said he's down. He's just in the middle of school. He's young, but he has mastered Gouldian breeding, and I have a lot of great healthy birds from him.
Yeah.
And he's got. I think I'm going to actually have more coming from him soon. And then some of the birds that you're getting from
Yep.
me are from his line, and some of them are split to dilute or split to yellow too. So it's
And
genetics
the one
are awesome.
the ones you'll get are possible split blues. So the male is split to blue, so the chicks have a 25% chance there. So
Right. And like we've talked about before, by the way, if you do want to make blue backs, the best way to do it is two unrelated splits,
correct. Yeah.
because the less inbred, the better. You can still get to a blueback. There's enough blueback now out in the world that you can get to a blueback without inbreeding birds. That's the way to do it. I also want to touch on society finch fostering.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, I talked to a guy, I don't want to say his name, down in South Florida. I'm sure he's not going to listen to this. He's in his 70s, so I doubt he's a podcast guy. But he has been breeding Gouldians, I want to say 40 years. And, I'm not 40. So he's been doing it a long time. But he told me, and he was kind of bragging to me, that he has 150 pairs of Gouldians. And then to feed all the babies, he has 300 pairs of societies.
Wow.
And it just breaks my heart, because just like with button quail, if you don't, so it might look the same to us, but society finches do different parenting than Gouldians. And so Gouldians have this brutal reputation for chick tossing, for not taking care of their babies. And so a lot of people don't even let them try. They
Yep.
just put them right to societies. I don't use societies unless the birds are going to die, and I can't help. So
Yeah.
I'll sometimes when I'm breeding Gouldians, if I think the parents are struggling, I'll go behind the parents and do supplemental hand feeding, but leave them in their nest because that's
Yeah.
better than just pulling them and putting them with societies. I try to do that as a last resort, but sometimes it's going to take the birds two or three clutches to figure out how to do that. So, if anyone listening to this is thinking, oh, I'm going to just give them to societies, I'm begging you, do your best not to do that because all that creates in the long run is generations of Gouldians that don't know how to
Right.
raise babies. It just makes
And,
it, we're just perpetuating the problem.
yeah, and I want to put in the plug there, so probably the first 3 years that I was seriously breeding, that I started seriously breeding
Mm.
Gouldian finches, I did use societies as fosters, quite heavily, and I did that. But as I've progressed, I've tried really hard to transition that, and I think probably the last 4 years, I don't think I've used a society foster for Gouldian finches. They've done their own. Now that still comes. I've still had pairs that have tossed babies. I've still had babies that have
Mm.
died in the nest. I'm not saying that my
Track
Gouldian
record's
pairs
perfect.
are doing great, right? And so, but you're right. It does. The many times the birds will adopt the society finch male song. Gouldian finch is not so much because they have their very unique song, but they do adopt some of that society finch song. They can imprint on society finches instead of other Gouldian finches, things like that. So there are some cons that come to it. But I will say, um, in the past, society finches really have helped the captive
Right.
populations of
Yeah. We
Gouldian
wouldn't
finches and
have a.
and others, right? But now that we have a steady population of generations of captive bred Gouldian finches,
Mhm.
the type of care that we have to give them now to when they were wild caught is 100% different, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're not having to give them. Yeah, I would treat the wild caught Gouldian finches similar to many of the African species that we have in America now, because majority of them are wild caught or just a couple generations from
Right.
wild caught,
And
and
on
they
the
need that live
precipice. Yeah.
food, and they're a lot more picky, and they toss their chicks. So society finches are really helping those populations to expand and to
Mhm.
grow. And so there are benefits from it. But if I agree with you, Jay, if you can try to get away from it, I would encourage you to get away from it. Encourage the parents to do it themselves, even if it takes a couple iterations and it's not perfect. But that's how they learn best, and that's how they can really thrive and still keep that pure species of the song, their behaviors, imprinting on the right birds, things like that.
Right. And there are other things too that there are other ways to get around that. So, if I have multiple pairs of Gouldians breeding at the same time,
Hmm.
they can foster too. That
Absolutely.
that's great. I mean, I've done
Yep.
that with multiple species. As long
Yeah.
keeping it in the species is what's important. If you have one pair
Yeah.
that's not they're kicking out chicks, but they can't get them to the perch, and you have another pair that maybe they're only having a clutch of one or two, but they're getting to the perch every time. Like, okay, well now you have four.
Right.
So, rock and roll there. And they are a great bird. I love seeing them. I love breeding them. I can't imagine being a finch keeper and not keeping Gouldians.
Totally.
But do your homework, get updated, which is really what we're talking about, updated husbandry information, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're getting it out of a book and you look at the little front cover and that book was written in 1996,
Like the ones
like,
behind me.
yeah, right. Yeah, they're cool for the shelf now, but let's move past it. It's like
Yeah.
I guess the best analogy would be like zoos, right? In the old days, it was all metal bars and concrete floors. Now, when you go to the zoo, that's not what you see. So,
Right.
let's advance aviculture husbandry accordingly.
Yeah. And I would say Gouldian finches now are hardier, they are healthier,
Yeah.
they are easier to breed, but they're still not a beginner bird. That's what I would say
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah. So that's what I do too. So it's great bird, great third, fourth species.
For sure.
Um, Definitely worth the time, definitely worth the money, definitely worth the effort. And hopefully this helps some people.
Yeah. I love that.
All right, guys. Well, you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Threads, and Facebook as the Javiary, Chris.
Yep. Same, YouTube, Instagram. I do have Threads, but I don't update a whole lot on Threads, so it's mostly Instagram, YouTube, just at Bird Nerd for both channels. Try to update and post weekly, so hopefully you guys can see those and enjoy
And
them. Drop some
we'll
comments
link
for
all
us.
that
So
below.
yeah,
Yeah, drop us comments. What do you want to hear about next? What species do you want us to talk about next?
yeah, for
All
sure.
right. Thank y'all.
See you guys.